The honourable member for Winnipeg South Centre.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's always a pleasure for me to rise in this House on behalf of those I represent in Winnipeg South Centre. Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleague across the way from Winnipeg Centre, who is also a neighbour of mine. Our constituencies border one another. And I know that the member for Winnipeg Centre comes to work every day, Madam Speaker, with a genuine desire to advocate for those that she serves. And in many instances, Madam Speaker, those that she serves are amongst the most impoverished in our city and in our country. During my years, Madam Speaker, as an educator, as a teacher and a principal in particular, I learned a lot about the various things that are required for kids and their families to live a successful and healthy life. In particular, Madam Speaker, I can recall a program in the Seven Oaks School Division, of which I was an employee, located in the northwest part of the city of Winnipeg for a number of years, that sought to give families and their kids a leg up. And what we did at that time is we took some grant money that had been given to us through a partnership at the province, and we provided those in need. Usually it was single mothers with kids at home living in some precarious situations by virtue of poverty, intergenerational trauma, and other obstacles that daily life presents. And we gave them cash on a monthly basis. And what they did with that money is they invested it in the basic necessities of life, which included food, books, transportation, and other things that would make life easier, healthier, and more comfortable for them and their children. On that note, Madam Speaker, I do want to say that I'm extremely proud of the investments that the federal government is making in a national school food program. I understand that there are some significant conversations happening and progress is underway with my home province of Manitoba, where a collaboration between our two levels of government is going to leverage existing funding to help make sure that kids in need in our province are getting the type of nutritious and healthy food that they need to succeed. And what we saw, Madam Speaker, going back to this program in my former school division, was that people were happier, they were healthier, and they had that boost and that leg up that they needed. Now, Madam Speaker, in my home province of Manitoba, in the 1970s, there was an experiment. It was in the city of Dauphin in northern Manitoba. And it was undertaken and constructed, implemented by a woman named Dr. Evelyn Forget. And I'm very proud to say, Madam Speaker, that Dr. Forget is a constituent of mine. And I remember during my by-election just last year when I knocked on her door and we started talking about basic minimum income, she said, "I really think you ought to be thinking about this," and gave me some ideas. And I said, "Did you know that there was a project in Dauphin in the 1970s? And she said, "Yes, I wrote it." So it was fascinating for me to have the opportunity to have a constituent with such a high degree of expertise and firsthand knowledge of this important issue. And since then, I've had some very interesting conversations with Madame Forget and with other members of my constituency who have articulated their desire to see me support this piece of legislation put forward by my colleague from Winnipeg Centre. What's interesting when you read about the program in Dauphin in the 1970s and you look at some similar implementation of programs as recently as a few months ago here in the province of Ontario, you see emerging some very interesting stories that paint a picture of the ways in which a form of a basic minimum income could be of benefit to Canadians. So, Madam Speaker, at this stage of the debate, which is one that would, if the bill is able to pass through this stage and then lend itself to further discussion at the committee is one that is worthy of our support. I believe that it is merited for us to have a longer conversation about this piece of legislation, and I think it's appropriate in our system, in our parliamentary system, that the committee stage, whereby we hear from witnesses and experts who give us guidance on whether or not it makes sense for us to move forward, is an appropriate place for this particular piece of legislation to further explore the merits or the disadvantages of a basic minimum income. So with that, Madam Speaker, I would like to let the House know that I will be, when the time comes to vote on this particular piece of legislation, lending my support to it. I will note, Madam Speaker, that I do have questions and I do have concerns, particularly as they pertain to cost, fairness, and distribution. However, as I noted a moment ago, Madam Speaker, I trust that a thorough review of the proposed policies that we have seen listed in this piece of legislation at the committee stage will help us to answer those questions and let members decide at that point whether or not the merits of such legislation deserve to go on to the next stage. So with that, Madam Speaker, I'm going to keep my remarks more brief today than perhaps I would otherwise, and I will conclude by again reiterating that I thank my colleague and my neighbor in Winnipeg for putting forward this piece of legislation, for enabling us to have an important discussion in this place about how we can support one another. And I will look forward to following the remarks that are to come from other colleagues as we decide whether or not to allow the legislation to advance to the next stage. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.